and we are going to get going. So I will call the Tuesday, November 28th, 2023 meeting to order, and I'll begin with the land acknowledgement that the City of Fort Saskatchewan is located on Treaty 6 territory and Métis Nation of Alberta District 11, the ancestral and traditional territory of the Nihilwak, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, Dene. Okay, we're going to try that one again. Territory of the Nihilwak, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, and Métis. And we acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. It is because of our treaty relationship that we can live, work, and play on Treaty 6 territory. And a few housekeeping rules, because we do have guests in here that are not familiar with our building maybe. In case of an emergency, there is an emergency exit through the chamber doors and then out the front doors of the building. The muster point is at the south end of the parking lot. Washrooms are located in the main lobby if you need them. All right, thank you. Where did Brian go? Okay, so we will begin with the consent agenda, and I will take a motion for the consent agenda, and that would include items 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, 3.5, which are approval of minutes of the previous council meetings, and 7.1, which is cancellation of the November 30th regular council meeting. Somebody would like to put that motion on. Councillor Harris.
I would move that we approve the consent agenda with the items so included.
All right, thank you very much. The motion, does anybody have anything for discussion or debate? I'm sorry, I'm just so excited today. My mind is like...
I did not see any errors or omissions.
All right.
Any of the minutes.
All right, thank you. So not having anybody buzz in for that, I will close the motion. Please cast your vote. And that is carried. So the next item are delegations. If there's anybody in the audience who would like to speak to either the audit plan or the council remuneration and expense procedure, this would be your time to come forward. Not seeing anybody racing up to the podium. We will begin with the presentation for the 2023 audit plan. Colleen Wagner, Sheldon Jacobs, and Christina Lothan. Welcome. Just looks better.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and members of Council. It is my pleasure today to introduce members of our KPMG audit team. Today with me I have Christina Lothan and Sheldon Jacobs, who are the members of our KPMG audit team for 2023. And they're going to present the 2023 audit plan to you today. And after they're done presentation, we'll answer any questions that you may have.
Good afternoon. Your Worship and members of Council, it's our pleasure on behalf of KPMG to present our 2023 audit planning report for you. The intention of this report is really to give you some insight and transparency into our audit efforts for fiscal 2023. I'm going to start off with our audit highlights. So basically, this sheet here gives you sort of a snapshot of the audit for fiscal 2023, and I'm really going to focus on any of the changes relative to past periods. And we'll just touch on high points as we go through the presentation, since you've had the slide deck in your package for today's meeting. The first part is the scope of our audit. So there's no change to the scope of our audit for this year. There's basically 4 audits that we're going to complete for you. The first one is an audit of the consolidated financial statements for the city. The second one is there's a specified financial information form that's prepared for Alberta Municipal Affairs, and basically that information is derived from the financial statements of the city, and we audit that document, which is submitted to the department. There is an audit of the library board, and then finally we audit a grant schedule associated with FCSS. So that's consistent with the past and no real changes to scope. The one point that is a change this year compared to past periods is on the right-hand side, where we have risk assessment. In the middle of the page, we speak about a topic called asset retirement obligations. When I met with council back in April, we talked a bit about the accounting standard changes that are applicable to all municipalities in fiscal 2023. There are a number of accounting standards that are applicable this year that are going to be adopted by municipalities across the country. The most significant one is asset retirement obligations. And I believe when I talked about this standard back in April, I gave an example of asbestos removal from buildings. Organizations have a legal obligation to remove asbestos from a building at the end of its useful life. Historically, under municipal accounting, the costs associated with the removal of asbestos or any other type of hazardous materials that there's a legal obligation to remove, historically that cost would be recorded in the financial statements of a municipality in the year incurred. So if you have a building that's going to last 40 years and you have to get rid of the asbestos in year 40, historically that cost would be recorded. All of that cost would be recorded in year 40. Now, under the new accounting standards, that cost has to be estimated. So today we've got to estimate what that cost will be 40 years from now, or 20 years from now, or 17 years from now, depending on the life of the asset. It gets present valued back, and then it gets allocated or prorated over the next number, like 40 years, over the remaining life of the asset, so that that cost actually gets recorded in bits and pieces over the life of the asset in every year, as opposed to all at the end of the year. So we talked a little bit about that back in April, and that's probably the most significant change that most municipalities will find as they finalize the reporting for fiscal 2023. So obviously our audit plan this year contemplates doing incremental audit work associated with all of these standards, and most of the heavy lifting will be associated with the asset retirement obligation standard. The other thing that's really different about this standard is that it requires an understanding of the legal obligations. You have to estimate the extent of retirement obligations, and you have to estimate the cost associated with that. So administration had engaged a third-party engineering firm to help with that part of the exercise, and we, as your auditors, will be reviewing the work of the engineers, and we will be actually relying on their work for purposes of our audit as well, because they have the expertise in that area. So I'm just going to quickly, we'll go through some of the other slides here, and you'll see these new standards kind of creep in throughout the document, but we won't go into any more detail than what I've just explained. The next couple slides actually speak to the concept of materiality. So when we do an audit, we're focused on being comfortable that the financial statements aren't materially misstated. So we're looking for and identifying, either individually or in aggregate, errors in the financial statements that could potentially make them misleading. So for this year's audit, we've determined a materiality of roughly $2.8 million, and that's based on 3% of budgeted expenditures. In last year, the materiality we used was 2.6 million, so roughly the same. So that difference is really not going to change overall effort associated with the audit. On the next slide, we talk about involvement in others, and I already touched on the fact that we will be relying on the work of any management specialists that have been engaged to assist with the accounting for asset retirement obligations. So again, that's something new for this year. Next slide talks about the accounting policy change, or the accounting standards that have changed this year. And again, this is for all municipalities. The one that we anticipate having the largest change is the asset retirement obligations. There's a handful of other ones in the second bucket up on the slides. Those really are going to impact more the disclosures in the financial statements and some of the risk disclosures around what we call financial instruments. And financial instruments are things like cash and investments. So any debt type of instruments, there might be some enhanced disclosures around that in the financial statements. Moving on to the next slide, it talks about group audit scoping. And when we audit the consolidated financial statements of the city, they're actually comprised of two entities. They're comprised of the actual balances and transactions of the city itself, and the library board is also included in those consolidated financial statements. Excuse me. So from an auditing perspective, we call that a group audit because it's not just one entity that forms your financial statements. It's more than one, and in your case, two. So when we do a group audit, we typically like to give those charged with financial oversight, and in this case, council, an insight into where we focus our audit work. Well, in your scenario, the library board is quite insignificant in relation to the overall balances and transactions of the actual city of Fort Saskatchewan. So when we do our audit of the consolidated financial statements, we don't plan to do any incremental work on the library board balances and transactions to support our audit on the consolidated financial statements because they're not that significant. Saying that, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, we do a separate audit of the library board, and so to the extent that there was anything that arose in the library board financial statements that could potentially have a bearing on the financial statements of the municipality, we would have that insight as a result of doing that second audit. So that really, this basically just highlights the fact that our audit effort is focused on the actual balances and transactions of the municipality proper. With that, I'm going to turn over the next few slides to my colleague, Christina, and she's going to walk through some of the areas of focus.
You can pull that down. Yeah.
I speak quietly too, so let me know if I'm not speaking loud enough. So the next area of our report involves the significant risks and areas of focus for our audit plan this year. The first risk here is the presumption of the risk of fraud resulting from management override of controls. So this risk is actually required under professional auditing standards, so it's mandatory that we involve it in all of our audits. So to address this risk, we've included a few specific procedures within our planned response. Anywhere from testing specific journal entries that meet specific high-risk criteria to performing specific review of the estimates and evaluating business rationale of any significant unusual transactions. The next main risks for our audit plan this year really revolve around that asset retirement obligation. So as Sheldon discussed, since this is quite the new concept to municipalities this year, we've highlighted it as one of our main areas of audit focus. So the first risk associated with these asset retirement obligations is the risk that they are not completely identified and recorded. So within our planned audit procedures, we will be doing specific work to assess the completeness of the asset retirement obligations. The second significant risk associated with the asset retirement obligation is the risks relating to the assumptions selected and the estimated costs and timing within the calculation and determination of the retirement obligation itself. So our planned audit procedures will include everything from evaluating the underlying cost estimates to the significant assumptions used within the calculation, as well as evaluating the estimated timing of when you will be performing the required retirement activities. And the last slide I'll be highlighting is the key milestones and deliverables. So this slide highlights our audit approach, everything from planning that starts in September through to the final reporting and closeout meetings in April 2024. It'll highlight all our key presentation and meeting dates, as well as the phases of the audit process. And with that, I will pass it back to Sheldon.
Thank you. And so there's 3 appendices in our presentation. I don't plan to go through those in detail. They're there for your information. First one speaks to the audit quality framework we have at KPMG. The second one speaks to some new auditing standards. Again, they're really around quality control and audit firms, and we have fully adopted and are compliant with those new standards. And the last one is basically a link to a number of thought leadership pieces that might be of interest to council members. So with that, that concludes our formal presentation of the fiscal 2023 audit plan.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. I will open it up to council to ask clarifying questions as this will be coming back to us. Councillor Harris?
Sheldon, you made reference to the adoption of the standards relative to the reporting of loans receivable, things of that nature. We've always kind of had some mention in that regard. Council made an approval to loan Lions Club some money for a project. Is that an example of what would then be considered a loan receivable?
Through your worship, yes, those types of loans typically would be on your balance sheet as a loan from the other party. The actual recognition and the accounting for that type of an arrangement won't be different than what you've had historically.
Okay, so it's shown and it's tracked accordingly, so it doesn't get lost in the noise, if you will.
That would be my expectation. Yes.
So then when it's eventually retired, whatever the note terms are, number of years, then that comes off the schedule at that point in time?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. Councillor Kelly?
Thank you, and good afternoon, folks. Page 10 of your presentation, I missed it when I read it, but when you spoke about it, it caught my attention. Just like to go back to it for a second. The last bullet point, evaluating the business rationale of significant, unusual transactions, if any. How would you determine if a transaction is unusual without looking at all significant transactions?
Okay, through your worship. It's a very good question. So this standard, as Christina had mentioned, is really around the concept of fraud. So in any organization, we do look for the potential that fraud could exist. So the focus there would be during the course of our audit, to the extent that we come across transactions or balances just don't make sense relative to our understanding of the municipality or our broader understanding of municipalities, because we do a number of them, it would require us to dig further to understand the business rationale of that balance or that transaction. And to the extent that we have concerns that that transaction, isn't a transaction that really represents the business of the municipality, then it would be incumbent on us to drill down further to really understand whether or not there's something more sinister behind that transaction. So identifying those types of transactions is really a matter of, I'll call it sort of a cumulative type of an approach. So in our audits, we do a fair bit of sampling. So we don't test every transaction in the municipality. We have what we call sampling plans, which are statistically based tools that allow us to go into a data set and then select some samples to test. And the results of those tests, to the extent that we find any errors, are extrapolated on a statistical basis. So as we do the testing, if we uncover a transaction that doesn't make sense to us, then that would be one way that we would come across that. Another way that we do is would come across that type of a transaction is we do a fair bit of work around journal entries. So these are journal entries that are posted. Typically, it's not an invoice or a typical receipt that's issued through regular course business. There's an entry that goes into the books or records, typically from somebody in management. And that could be outside of your regular procurement system. So we look at those types of transactions again to make sure that we're comfortable that they represent transactions that should be valid transactions for a municipality. If there is material activity, so as an example, a capital project where we might do some focused work on a larger capital project in a year, we'll do some sampling. We'll look at, we have some IT enabled technologies that also allow us to identify anomalies in a data set. So we'll look for, again, transactions that just might not make sense relative to what we're seeing in the overall population that we're examining. Again, kind of having our antennas up, looking for instances where a transaction doesn't make sense in the bigger context of the municipality.
Thank you. Good answer, I thought. And it wasn't a test. Just as I walked in, you were discussing the asset retirement obligation. I remember talking about this at least last year, if not the year before that as well. The obligation to accrue arises with your legal obligation to do something with the asset at the end of the day or whenever the problem arises. So, and I think I asked this question before and maybe my recollection is confused. If we have a building that has reached its useful life and we have no further use for the building, let's be clear on that, do we have a legal obligation to accrue demolition costs?
Through your worship. Specifically, what you'd be looking for is legal obligations associated with that demolition. So there are situations where organizations could mothball a facility and just leave it and not demolish it and leave it in perpetuity. In those cases, if there's no legal obligation requiring an organization or a municipality to demolish it, then we would not have an asset retirement obligation. In a situation in a municipal environment, your legal obligation can come from a number of different sources. So, for instance, the proverbial one or the most common one is asbestos. So there are regulations in place that when you demolish the facility, that there are particular ways that asbestos has to be removed from the building and disposed of. That would be captured by the standard. If council had made some type of a commitment or promise to deal with certain elements of a building upon demolition, and that could constitute a legal obligation on behalf of the municipality, then that type of cost would also or could potentially be captured. But it really is where there's a legal obligation. If you're in a situation where you can mothball a facility and kind of put a fence around it and leave it standing there in perpetuity, you typically don't have an asset obligation associated with that. So it really starts with the legal obligation. So we do turn to administration for that assessment from a legal perspective, and then to the engineering firm in terms of assessing scope, magnitude, and quantum.
Thank you. And if I may make, Mayor Katcher, one question to Mr. Fleming or the auditor, either one, but it sticks in my mind that administration was undertaking some work to identify within our city asbestos issues. Am I correct? And if I am, did that work happen?
I'll address that to Mr. Fleming or Miss Janelle Smith Duguid, or whoever he'd like to delegate to speak.
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, yes, we did complete that study. We identified through that study, we identified both.
Can you sit down because you're live streamed?
Oh, sorry. Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, yes, that work was completed towards the end of last year and early 2023. It did identify both legal obligations that we would have, as well as things that a number of costs that we might would not quite rise to the level of a legal obligation, but we will likely have to incur as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nguyen.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. Given that I think you've done the audit now for 2 or 3 years, we've spoken about asset retirement. Can you give us an idea of the scope or the maybe net value generally of assets belonging to the City of Fort Saskatchewan that would fall under the retirement obligation? I don't know if that, I know that's kind of a tricky question to answer in ways as well. Oh, that's.
Through your worship, to Councillor Nguyen, we believe that the cost, the initial report that we had received was showed about between 10 to 15 million. The final cost of that, we're still going through with the auditors to look at whether or not they all meet the definition of a legal obligation, and as well as we won't have a final set of numbers until we have a discount rate at the end of 2023. So there's a few different variables that are still in play.
Excellent. So we'll be able to see that work here in the audit presentation. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any additional questions? If not, thank you very much for coming and presenting your audit planning report. We look forward to hearing the results. So you're welcome to stay, you're welcome to leave. So thank you. Okay, the next item that we have on the agenda is Council Remuneration and Expense Procedure Update. Andrew Kaiser presenting.
All right. Good afternoon, Your Worship and members of Council. I'm here today to present the revised Council Remuneration and Expenses Procedure Gov 009C for your consideration. The revisions proposed in the amended procedure are based on Council's discussion during the June 27th regular Council meeting, as well as the October 17th Committee of the Whole. So during the June 27th meeting, the discussion focused on the budgets available to Council throughout the year, as well as the amounts specified in the procedure against the procedure's comparable municipalities. Then on October 17th, during the Committee of the Whole, the conversation expanded to include these comparable municipalities specified by the procedure, as well as historic spending of overall Council budgets and how those funds can be used. As the referral motion passed on October 17th, the one on the screen before you, focused on the comparable municipalities, this is where I'm going to begin my presentation. So the table in my presentation, which is up on the screens, includes information from Appendix A of the Council report. Only the municipalities or rows from that table, which included recommendations, are included on this slide. Before I dive into the table, I would like to draw your attention to a correction, which is highlighted in blue. When preparing the report, we found information online that classified Leduc's, the City of Leduc, Leduc's mayor as part-time. But the remuneration wasn't really in alignment with this categorization. So after a phone call to their administration this morning, they classify their mayor as full-time. So I've made that change in the slide to reflect that. I would suggest that the procedure be slightly amended given this information, but I'll get into that later in my presentation. So the table in the report and on this slide contains all of the factors that were discussed during the October 17th Committee of the Whole, being the municipality's membership in a municipal growth management board, the same structure being a full-time mayor and part-time councillors, as well as total population. So administration's recommendations are based on those factors, and they're summarized in the right-hand column on that table. Next, Council asked for a summary of historic spending to see how much of their overall budget was still available to them at the end of the year. This summary was provided based on all of 2022 and up to the end of Q3 of this year. We felt that the data prior to 2022 wouldn't make a good reference point since the pandemic drastically affected the availability of conferences, networking, professional development, and thus also affecting council expenditures. So as you can see in the report and the slide before you, councillors on average only expended about half of their overall budget, 51%, leaving an average, again, of $6,300 unspent. So this isn't meant to be a call to all of you to spend all of your budget, but instead highlights that there are funds available to councillors if they choose to reallocate those funds between their general ledger codes or lines in their budgets, according to the procedure, obviously. So, to summarize, it would be my recommendation that the revised remuneration and expenses procedure be approved, but as I said earlier, with slight change given Leduc's structure of their council. So it would be my recommendation that a motion be put on to approve the procedure, but then an amendment be cast, being at a minimum to include the city of Leduc and the comparators. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation and welcome any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll open it for questions first. Okay, Councillor Blizzard.
Bear with me because I kind of read this at home on a computer. It was all in one and now I separated. But 6.2, let me see if I can find it. Mentions something about section 4.1. When I went back to 4.1, it didn't seem relevant. Is that just a typo, or because that mentions 4.1 as the mayor's remuneration? Is that supposed to be 6.1?
Yes.
So more of a correction, I guess.
Just yeah, through you, your worship, to Councillor Blizzard. In the track changes version, it might be a little more clear that that was a typographical.
Oh, was it? Because I thought I went through there, but maybe not. Maybe I didn't double check in the later ones.
Yeah, it did previously cite 4.1, but it is supposed to be 6.1, so that correction was made.
Okay, and that was ready made. Okay, and the other one, and I guess this one, I'm going to ask, I guess it would have to be fellow councillors. So one of the issues I have, and it's not often because we don't go out often, but we are limited all through this in a couple of spots that it says 15% gratuity, and I understand that we can certainly add in our own, but sometimes when you're doing a $20 meal and 15% would be $3, and I feel it should be, you know, that's just to me seems a little low. So yes, I can add my 50 cents in, but it seems weird to do it on part of it and then here's an extra 50 cents. Personally, I feel our minimum should be 18%, and the other reason would be because when we go somewhere and there's times where you're sitting at a group table and they automatically charge you a set amount for a gratuity. So I don't know what others think of this, but I just feel we should raise that minimum to 18 anyways. Thoughts? I don't know how you want to handle that. Can I make a motion?
You can make a motion.
Okay.
So I guess probably the question is to Mr. Fleming, Finance is gone. If you're in a situation where the gratuity is automatically 18%, is the council member going to be required to pay the 3%?
To your worship, I know administratively we've been accepting 18% when it's coming through if staff have had the same issue. So it would make sense to me for council to make an amendment to permit the 18%. Again, as it's been happening over the last few months for us, or years, I should say, we've been permitting it. So we probably would have been doing the same for council, would be my guess. But
so you can make a motion to amend it to 18% if you like.
Sure, I'll make a motion. I don't know how you want to word it. I'll let you do it, but I'd like to make, and I think there was two different references in here. I made note of them, 7.6 and 11.1. both mention a 15% gratuity, and I would make a motion that we raise that to 18%.
So do you want her to cite the sections or just amend the procedure to allow for 18%?
Yeah, I think we could, to you, Your
Generalize.
Worship, we could just note that all specified gratuities within the procedure be raised to 18% or something to that effect.
Okay, so we'll just get a motion so you can go ahead and speak to it if you want.
I think I already did. I just feel that, we can, as a group, if it was slitting and then you're at a table where it's allowed, but even on a level where we're out somewhere and there's 15% is the minimum, we're becoming more of a cashless society. So not everyone has that extra, whether it's $1 or $2 to make it up to the 18 or 20. I like to even do 20, but yeah, so I think 18 should be the minimum.
Okay, so I'll open that one for discussion and debate. We'll still come back to some further questions if there's any after. I'm not seeing any discussion or debate, so we'll just wait for the motion to come up. Do you want the sections in there? Or do you just...
I think that is the only, to Your Worship, I think that is the only sections that specify the gratuity, so I think that's accurate.
Okay. Anything on close, Councillor Blissard?
No.
Okay, thank you. So I'll close that motion. Please cast your vote. And that is carried unanimously. Okay, so we'll continue on. Did you have anything else, Councillor Blissard?
I do not.
Okay, so I've got a couple of questions. So on consolidating all their expenses for one, I know you've got travel, meals and expenses, courses and conferences. Does that include their promotional budget as well?
Your Worship, yes, that includes all line items associated with the councillor's budget, so the promotional budgets would be included.
Okay, and I only asked that question because I don't think, I think most of the promotional comes through the corporate one, and 6,000 was removed from corporate before, so, okay. It'll be just a reminder that don't just forward your promotional onto the mayor's corporate account, or the corporate account if you've got promotional in yours. Councillor Harris, question?
So, relative to section 4.3, where we talk about the city, the comparable municipalities, so am I left to believe that the cities would then be Spruce Grove, adding in Beaumont, taking out Camrose, adding in Chestermere, leaving in Leduc, taking out Lloydminster and Airdrie. That's what we would do, and then we're adding in Parkland County. Are those the then final comparable municipalities as recommended by administration?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Harris, if an amending motion is made or if it's passed via friendly, I would suggest that Leduc be added. As it's presented to you right now, they're not included. So it would be Spruce Grove, Beaumont, Chestermere, and then on to Okotoks, Parkland County, and Cochrane. So an amendment would have to be made to include the city of Leduc, but that is my recommendation, is that they be added back in.
Well, since I asked the question, then I'd be prepared to make that motion to add Leduc back in. I'm not sure about the Chestermere situation. They are ultimately in a similar situation of kind of semi-comparable size. You know, I read your recommendation. I don't know, I just have a funny feeling about Chestermere. They're a unique cat, to say the least, and I don't mean to denigrate them in any way. So if that's the case, I'd be prepared to add Leduc back into the mix of the comparable municipalities. And we've got Parkland County there. That was in the recommendation, so I'd be prepared to keep them in.
Okay, so we'll go into discussion and debate on that. Councillor Blissard, are you on debate on this one, or are you another question?
It was a different question.
Okay, I'll come back to you then on questions. Okay, I do have a question on that. So adding Leduc in, who are you taking off? You're taking Beaumont off?
So the proposed municipalities to include would be Spruce Grove, Beaumont, which would stay in if this motion passed.
But who are you taking off?
Oh, apologies. The ones proposed to be removed are Camrose, Leduc, but this motion would address that, Lloydminster, and Airdrie.
No, but if you're adding one on, I assume we only want it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That would make it 7.
So as the policy stands right now, there are 7 comparable municipalities, and the proposed amendments would take it down to 6. So if Leduc, the city of Leduc, is being added back on, there actually wouldn't be a change in the total amount of comparators.
Okay, so I'll support adding the city of Leduc. I have questions about adding Chestermere. They're a population of 22,000. And in light of everything that's going on in their world right now, I really don't think they're a good comparable for us, period. So after we deal with this motion, I may put a motion on to take them off because I really don't believe they're a good comparison. So we're dealing with Councillor here. Oh.
Well, if that's the case within the context of my motion, then I'd be prepared to suggest that we'd add in Leduc and take out Chestermere because, as I say, when they get through their issues right now, which are political, as opposed to a community basis, we can revisit that. I mean, Beaumont is a similar size. They're about 23,000, right? Correct?
20,888.
Okay, so I mean, that argument is such that, but Beaumont's in this area, so I'd be prepared to include that in my motion, that we basically would add in Beaumont, take out Camrose.
Beaumont's in already.
No, it's being added in.
So through your worship to Councillor Harris, your motion would only have to change to include the removal of Chestermere from the suggested procedure amendments. So it would be the addition of the city of Leduc and the removal of Chestermere, city of Chestermere.
Make it so.
Okay. Okay. All right, so we're still on discussion and debate. Anything on this one? Anything on close, Councillor Harris? Okay, so I'll close this motion. Please cast your vote. That's a good point. Do you need the original motion on, do you need the motion on first, or can we should be able to do this. Yeah, because it would be in the context of the existing procedural bylaw.
Yeah, I mean, my preference would have been maybe to pass the motion for the approval of the procedure before these amendments, but we understand the context. The minutes will reflect the intent.
Okay, so yeah, so he'll do that. Okay, all right. So go ahead on. Please cast your vote, and then you can do the next motion. That is carried unanimously. Go ahead. Can you push your button?
Well, didn't Councilor Blizzard have some questions that ultimately she may want to address that might give rise to further slight amendments?
We'll just get the motion on. That'll make Andrew happy. Go ahead.
Of course. Well, then I would
Push your button. Thank you.
Well, who keeps turning it off?
Nobody. You go ahead.
I guess I turned it off. I apologize. So, anyways, I would move that council approve the amended council remuneration and expenses procedure Gov-009-C as presented and attached as Appendix D.
Okay. Do you have anything further to speak to it?
I do not.
Okay. Thank you. So go into discussion, debate, and questions, Councillor Blizzard.
Yeah, again, going through the couple of documents, so maybe something got moved somewhere else. But in 6.4, in I think the original document that I was looking at, it had that you cannot carry over from one budget year. And I see that is removed, although for some reason I'm not being able to pull it up. But it looked like it was removed in the updated one.
Through your worship to Councillor Blizzard, that section was removed because it was redundant, so that was actually already addressed by section 3.6 of the procedure. So it just
here I thought, oh, we could just not spend it 1 year, and
no.
Okay, I didn't think so.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
You're good. Okay. So nothing further on the motion. If not, anything on close? You're good. I'll close the motion. Please cast your vote.
Your Worship, we just acquired Councillor Abertoyer's vote.
Okay, and that's carried unanimously. All right, thank you very much. Next item, 7.1 was done under consent. Number 8, any notice of motions? Not seeing any. Are there any points of interest? I think the biggest point of interest today, of course, was the announcement of Dow and that they are doing their $6.5 billion expansion facility, and there will be more information coming tomorrow. They issued their press release this morning at 6:30 out of New York, and it's actually getting a lot of worldwide attention, but I think we'll see more of that in Canada and Alberta after tomorrow when they have an official event out there. So great news for our community, and really looking forward to seeing the progress. Are there any other points of interest? Not seeing any. Are there any councillor inquiries? Not seeing any. So we're going to do something a little bit different before we go to the closed session today. I'm going to call a recess for the regular council meeting in order to proceed with the emergency meeting advisory committee meeting. And I'm told we're able to do this without adjourning and then having to come back. So this will be the process. The regular council meeting will convene after the recess, and then once we reconvene from the recess, then we will take a motion to go in camera and deal with the in-camera items that we have. So with that, I'm told that the emergency management one will be about 15 or 20 minutes.
Yes, and I think we need a quick break to switch over.
Yeah. So we'll take 5 minutes, 47, 52, 2:55. Be back in your chairs, so we will recess to then, and then we will begin with the emergency management one. Okay, thank you.